In our next panel, we're going to have some of our poets who were earlier on stage coming back. The section is called I Never Saw a Moor, I Never Saw the Sea, the Prescient in Poetry. I'm going to invite our panelists Barnali Ray Shukla, Monica Modi, Purna Swami, Sukrita Paul Kumar, and to moderate this session, I want to welcome back Sudha Rao. Can we please have a huge round of applause for our panelists?
Welcome to the session focused on the great American poet Emily Dickinson's poem. And the theme ensuing is our discussion on the prescient in poetry. As you know, I'm Sudha Rao, and I'm with Monica Modi, Barnali Ray Shukla, Purna Swami, and Sukrita Paul Kumar, who are going to be helping me with this discussion. What we're going to be talking about is the Emily Dickinson's poem and our thoughts about what the prescient in poetry is all about. And we will read some of her poems as well. I never saw a moor, I never saw the sea, yet I know how the heather looks and what a billow be. I never spoke with God, nor visited heaven, yet certain am I of the spot as if the checks were given. That's the full poem, Emily Dickinson's poem. In her 8 short lines, Emily Dickinson provides a veritable feast for contemplation and exploring how the poet has juxtaposed the known and the unknown, uncertainty with certainty, the physical and the metaphysical, while drawing the reader into a world of contemplation. There is so much more to say about this, and I was going to ask the panelists to give their insights. One definition of the word prescient is as having knowledge of events before they take place. To get the conversation going, I will be asking the perspectives of the poem as well. But as my own thoughts on that is that I think the poet here is declaring her certainty that she will be at the heaven's gates. Yet certain am I of the spot, she says, and a certainty based on what is the unknown. And also I think she delivers a kind of a forethought on her own expectations of getting there, the measures that she has to go through to get to her certain place of the heaven. In her last line, she says, as if the checks were given. So it's like it's certainty that there are things I've got to do before I get there. Now, before I pose my question to the panelists and get them to read their own poems, I'll just read a very short poem that I think kind of gives my impression of what prescience in poetry could be. To my daughter, you ask who gives life, who will give yours? Distracted by the words on my page, your arms round my neck, I'm unaware of how your heart races to where life lies. My daughter, you ask how to seek, how to give. Your eyes on the hill line flutter, open to the pursuit, like the explorer's untrodden path towards your truth. My daughter, you ask, when time will tell, when to cease. I ask, what is ceaseless? You have caught me out. Your search for kindness has caught up with me. So I'd like to ask Barnali to come and talk to you about prescience and her poems. Thank you.
Thank you, Sudha, for leading us in, and thanks all of you for being here. And I think without making my words more important than Emily Dickinson's, I'll take a leaf from her page. And as Sudha has allowed us, that we illustrate with our own work. So the prescience, I think Emily Dickinson, if she's watching us, this is something she would have all foreseen happening, yeah? So I'm going to read 4 poems. And it's not a departure at all from prescience that we talk about, but here I think first of all we need to unbox ourselves to think of a future. It's called February. Too cold, sitting by January. Once the same proximity was warm like the tropics. The mirth of new beginnings tiptoed away, sauntered, galloped. A few Januaries didn't make changes. At times, Februaries tried, but died younger than 28 days. January doesn't budge, unhinged by the weight of the year gone by, and March won't move. February has no choice. Edgy and restless every 4 years and nebulous, Neptunian February has called it quits. The revolution hasn't stopped, but the orbit has shrunk. We won't miss a sane February. It's January who's gone nuts. So, my next one being called Progressive History. So that poem has the word apostrophe, from which I have titled this book. Progressive history, an oxymoron, right? Each day I'm born a virgin, claimed for ours by nothing but an idea. No apostrophe needed to belong to the one who seeks me from the layers of darkness ahead to a light that is unafraid to be a lone voice. A light that spreads through limbs unabashed and insists on a little more than is needed to sow, a beam that plows perpetuity of generations that bore nothing but minds narrowed by plenty borrowed from history. I wait to be taken as the nib probes my depths, makes way for its ink. Scary. Thank you. This one's closer home. I've dedicated to all of us here who've had that man or men who are not on time. It's called You Are Not Late. Maybe she was able to see this coming. You are not late. I buried the moon in the ink pot before they carried my body to the pyre. Sandalwood burns slow. My ashes show no haste. The winds have changed, they've crossed the doldrums. The glow of my pyre won't lie about our latitudes. I will withhold my ashes from the insistent breeze. Make it by tonight or the next fortnight. That won't be late. The moon will wax to a fullness that you like. My epitaph will read in granite, you made it on time, to see me next morning as I rose to gather my own ashes. Thank you. And this is the last poem that I read. It's called Yellow Paper Plane. That yellow paper plane flew away, but not high enough to bring my song. But it found the moon, a half moon which hopes to be complete again, not with the fullness of reflected glory, but to begin a story for his side, the other side, which poets ignore. The paper plane, once a blank page, has new folds for it to fly. The moon felt lighter as a writer. It wrote with tremor on the unfurling paper, and the paper plane began losing height, losing height, losing height, but gaining depth. The moon paused to hold a thought beyond the night and wept as the paper plane was swept, as the paper plane was swept by this breeze of change. But the paper plane rose again, withstood, undoing, and spoke aloud. Someone must choose to end to begin a new story, and this time it's your dark side. The paper plane has come home, only this time it's not yellow, it's waiting to be red. Thank you. waiting to be read.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to say a special hello to my mother and my brother who are in the audience. This question, I was so intrigued by the theme of this session, right? Prescience. Prescience as foreknowledge, as foreshadowing, as foresight, right? And for me, when you look at the root of the word SCI, science, as something that is known, have we restricted and have we narrowed down the idea of what it is to know and what is it that can be known, right? So poetry as prescience allows me to really go and disturb a little bit of that realm of materialism too. And when I think of how have I engaged with it, how do I engage with it, how do I want to engage with this notion in my poetry, I thought of 3 different ways in which this was either showing up or in which I want to create this relationship. So the first is with fascism. And it's actually really interesting that we're living in a time where fascistic governments are around the world. They've taken over power. And I think there is a specific way in which poetry can step into that place. Not only because, even though history is not progressive, not only because history has shown us what is possible, right? There are certain models that we have, that we can reach towards, but also because in my own personal experience, when I was writing my first book, Kala Pani, I found myself in some ways, and this is even before the 2014 general elections here in India, I found myself writing about a certain relationship between the government and the media and citizenry, and then now that I look at it, I'm like, wow, what was that? What was it that I was writing to and writing from? The second way in which I think about prescience and poetry is as the voice of the ancestors coming and speaking through the poems. Now, even though our ancestors have gone, right? Like they've passed on, like they're in another dimension, yet is there a way in which poetry can perhaps become the mechanism by which they speak to us, and in that way, poetry becomes the vehicle of prescience for ancestors' voice. So I'll also be reading an excerpt from Kala Pani, and I'll be reading a little letter from my grandmother, or an excerpt from a letter from my grandmother to I guess, model some of these, or to demonstrate, show some of these. The third thing is it true that writing can signal or complete healing in some ways? That writing in some ways can anticipate healing? And if this is the case, can we be self-conscious about this particular model of prescience, right? Can we be self-conscious about what it is that we want to anticipate? What kind of wholeness, what kind of beauty, what kind of healing do we want to anticipate in this world? So I'm going to leave you with these 3 models. But let me begin by reading an excerpt from Kala Pani. And this is written as a news flash. The media, who are not often surprised, said they were surprised at sources having sent them a picture of the new government brand, accessorized with several captions, such as "Fascism hard at work, an endearing portrait. Why freedom of expression will prove to be an ordeal for you. Homage to our new values of cowardliness. How to cripple thousands of lives and limbs." Citizens were asked to stay calm and light-hearted while the new government stripped the pictures of their dangerous properties. Contorted face of the revolution looked back. Its mastheads surrogated a ventriloquism act. This will be known in history as an act of indiscriminate transparency. The illusion has been lapping up all the sensory information that comes its way, transmitting them as popular visual and auditory stimuli. Beeps and flashes emanate either from some location or from a different location. Clap, 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 clap. This is not a flash in the pan. Reliable sources confirm our glasses are quite full. Thank you. I want to read an excerpt from a longer poem, which I wrote in the form of a letter from my grandmother, my nani, to me. And my grandmother died during the partition. So it was quite an experience, writing this letter, imagining her life, imagining her relationship with my grandfather, with her children, with other women in the village, and perhaps these were medicine women, perhaps these are wise women, and perhaps they had to hide some of their medicine. So it's a longer poem. I'll just read you an excerpt. I have always flickered between my two names. Rupa, life's intelligence made of beauty. Buddhan, wisdom growing like vine. Women continued to gather every full moon, night fire beckoning, feet slipping away from the known village. We who lived with keenness, marrow song splitting in our veins, found our drum beat, drum dance. From one we split into three, walked in three worlds, feet tracing center of cosmos with every footfall, energy pouring from skin, alighting to birth new geometries of existence. We returned with howl of morning wind, gold veins in our feet popping from our travels between dimensions, peacock feathers in eyes. When we began to forget, silence between us stretched thick and woe. We whispered to each other the secret of remembering. This was our trick, brick by brick, building against the bridge to rainbow unknowns. I dreamt of you, granddaughter. The granddaughter I would never see and come to know. I wove you a marriage chadar. I wove you a coronet of butterflies, dun-colored warmth of swarm from a high desert. I danced with you. Under the stars, child, I howled for you. Howled my love for my 3 children, howled my love for my husband, howled my love for grandmothers in my blood. I sat under the page of the book you would one day write, tongue swelling with stories. I wanted you to find me, be your own vessel of truth, my love for you to deepen, a groove to fit what you know you would be.
So when I think about prescience in poetry, I think about that more as a process of writing rather than a conceit, really. Something that fascinates me about Emily Dickinson's poem is the fact that she says, I haven't seen these things, I haven't seen the sea, and yet I know its essence. So what she's really doing is she is speculating, right? She's writing a fiction. And when you think about the prescient, you think, okay, there's a certain knowledge of events before they happen, but what if you got rid of whether the event happens or not? You're creating the knowledge of some future you imagine. And I was at this writers' conference a couple of years ago, and someone there who was writing nonfiction said to me, well, don't you think that a poet is really a nonfiction writer at heart? And for a while I really believed that. We write poems from what we know and what we have seen of the world. Yeah, sure, maybe we might change the details, add a little bit of fiction, but we're really writing from what we know. And then later I thought, and especially when I started using myth in poetry and rewriting myth, that maybe poetry is a process of creating fictions. It can be, just as much as it can be an act of really documenting the world as is, almost like reportage. So for me, prescience is really that speculation. It's about creating a world of fiction, and it doesn't matter if that event happens, but I'm going to live in the knowledge that one day it will. So I'm going to read just 2 poems, and the first one is for something that will probably happen, but it's called For That Voyage. The slit along this coastline is not a refuge. The ship sailed too long ago. Do not believe the waves caress the shore. It is never safe to live in rupture. When cold ocean floods deck and conversation, and the flares disappear over some dark horizon between us and where the map should have led us, sail away, darling. Chase a sunset for pleasure. Away, away. Confessions are tides of vows. I promise there are only so many miles these arms will hold. Hold up that mast, darling. Away, away. Believe me when I say, I am ready for when we are brittle. The next poem I'm going to read is a slightly long one, and it's divided into sections, and it plays with the idea of performance and how performance can be a mode of sitting in that speculative space, of taking on this mode of prescience. It doesn't matter. The reality of whether the event occurs doesn't matter. I'm not talking of like a psychic happening, but it's just the process of embodying something that you have not known. And it's called Open Air Performance. 1. It's the feeling of surviving battle, she said, wiping the back of her neck with a white towel. What do you know of battles, he asked, and she tossed the towel at him. He caught it with one hand, folded it in half, accepted this truce. 2. Steps half buried in red mud and straggly grass, visible only after these rains. An uneven descent down concentric arcs to a stage. Cracked, damp stone. Ant lines tracing choreographies only the earth can hear. 3. What is it like to want to be watched, he asked. Criminal, she said, and buttoned her collar with 2 fingers barely touching. He laughed at the impracticality. Still, it was spectacular. Don't stare, she said. 4. to love on an open stage, not make love, but exist in its condition like the role of a lifetime. Shed skin from wanting, gesture from meaning, a standing ovation all around. We could be easy like that. Hold each other as the crowds well up in the seats around us, as shadows diffuse and sharpen on the cyclorama held up by two spines, your feet steady beside mine, your hands empty dances, mine still catching rain. The mud red and wet beneath us, the sky watching as it decays above us. 5. She couldn't see his form in the dark. He was equally sightless. They moved murkily. Sandpaper skin, scaffold of bone, on their backs the expanse of a drying lake almost tepid. They jumped in and swam underwater with their eyes open. 6. I want to look like that, I said, when Radha became Krishna, then Radha again. As the dejected Sakhi carried messages not from her to her beloved. I want to live the insignificant trauma of the insignificant part, the airy whirl and toss of limb to astonish each character I become and forsake. I want to show off that easy magic to say, I am still here, bound by stories told 1,000,000 times over 100 years, and still my bones have held this rain, held in this rain. I want an excuse to dissolve to mud, to become the anthill teeming with epics pronounced in miniature. I want to be the midget demon with many heads, wear a crown for each, then toss them off one by one in my own revolution. The thrill of being there, everything I am not here.
Hi, everyone. I think this is a theme that actually excites everybody, all poets, all writers, all creative people. And I think it's a theme that also builds within itself a certain kind of sense of adventure. And all creativity is all about some very strange kind of adventure. And I don't know why we write, because there isn't as if, it gets us any money or publishers or anything else, but it's just that there is a need for creative sensibility, in which all of us have, to push at the borders of some kind of reality that we all the time face. So how do we stretch that from the known to the unknown, and then back to the known, and in a circular way just go round and round, poem after poem. And every time, and I've been writing for decades now, every time one sits down to write a poem, it's not as if the poem is going to, be a proving of a point. It's not as if it's hypothetical, that you already know where you are going to end up. It's sometimes you end up with the ending first, and then you don't know which way you're going. So I find it very strange that most of us, do after writing, and after years of writing, you do discover that much of what you had written earlier is perhaps coming true. So how does that happen? The familiar into unfamiliar, and then back into the familiar. So I think it's some kind of a journey that one gets also, in a way, to use a smaller petty word, one gets addicted to. You want to keep doing it. You want to keep pushing it and find just the right words and then say, hey, I found it. And then maybe later on discover that was not the right word. It's like that, a circular kind of a journey. And Emily Dickinson has always been a very favorite poet of mine. But at the same time, Seamus Heaney, I was thinking, who just 2 months before he died, he wrote a poem called In a Field. And his friend Carol Duffy actually said that he had predicted his death in that, unfortunately. And so, it's not just one poet who writes that kind of poetry, but almost all of us do that. So I want to start with a poem which I call Of Creative Anxieties. In the process of writing, I am ahead of myself always, and there is no looking back. The rest of the time, I am stalking myself, and there is no looking ahead. The issue is that of keeping pace. Sounds simple. It's another poem I call Out of the Box. That this world has worlds beyond the stars I did not know. The blue of the skies I had never pierced, nor trekked on the purple rocks above the tree line. Never had I dived into the orphan's eyes to feel the grains of sand there, to feel her loveless childhood. Where was the scent that led to the valley of flowers? Why did I not hear the silence resounding in the hollow of the shell? I thought I had told and heard them all, the stories of pain and pleasure, of thirst and of desire, till you came out to me, my friend. You told it all, the story of your love, of its revelation. First and foremost, you found the courage to tell it all to your own self. With that nervous glint of conviction, you told it all, the shiver of brutal resolute mixed with fear. You, a woman, in love with another woman, crossing the line of control, unlocking the prisons of thought, like birds flying across sealed borders, risking prosecution, risking life. Bits of truth buried in the graveyard of words rose as if from the vaults in the bottom of the sea, like fireflies lighting the dark shores of life and truth. This is a series of poems that I wrote, and I'll just read a couple from that. This is in Vietnam for a poetry festival, and I kind of disappeared for a whole day to the Master Pagoda, which was actually, I was supposed to be at the festival at that time. And it was good because that festival was actually celebrating, in my mind, of yet another dimension of reality, which was what I discovered in these poems called Pagoda Poems. 9 times over, the word nothingness emerges again, yet again, in this 20-word poem by the master monk. The dragon, they say, descends into the sea searching for meaning and spewing jewels that become rocks, piercing into valleys of other rocks. Columns of light rise, dressed in stunning colors, devils dancing in step with gods. All in all, adding to nothingness and making meaning. One more. What is real? Image of the bird fluttering in the sky, or the one still in the gushing river? The wavy moon in the water, or the one above that is steady, parallel, always, forever? One small one, and that's the last one. 3 faces on a body that is half man, half woman. In the Master Pagoda, Brahma, the Hindu god, creator of the universe of mind and of intellect, is androgynous, is fair, just, is transgender. Thank you.
Thank you. Is it working? Yes. I just want to thank my panelists. We are out of time for questions. Okay, I'd just like to say thank you very much to Monica, Purnali, Purna, and Sukrita for giving their views on presciences. And it's as wide as the ocean and as big as the sky. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing your wonderful, wonderful pieces of poetry.